The penthouse was less a home and more a mausoleum of success, a monument to Julian Croft's dominion over the world. It was a cold cathedral of glass and steel, perched atop the city like a predator's nest. From 70 floors up, the sprawling metropolis was a glittering circuit board, and he was its master programmer. The silence within the cavernous space was curated, expensive, broken only by the whisper of the climate control and the distant, muted siren song of the world he had conquered. To Julian, this was the throne room of his kingdom. To his wife, Elara, it was the most beautiful cage ever constructed. He returned late, as he always did. The scent of victory clung to him, a sharp, metallic tang mixed with the expensive cologne he wore like armor. Julian Croft was a corporate gladiator, fresh from the arena. He shed his suit jacket, letting it fall onto a minimalist chair that cost more than a car, his movements precise and dismissive. He saw Elara waiting on the vast white sofa, a small, still figure in the landscape of his achievement. She was 6 months pregnant, a gentle swell beneath her cashmere dress, yet in the stark geometry of the room, she seemed to fade, a ghost haunting her own life. "The pre-launch metrics are unprecedented," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile air. It was not a conversation starter, it was a decree. He walked to the wet bar, the clink of a crystal decanter against a glass the only acknowledgement of her presence. "That's wonderful, Julian," she said, her voice soft, easily absorbed by the sound-dampening walls. He barely registered the words. His focus was already on tomorrow, on the grand unveiling of Kronos, the product that would elevate Ethelred Corp from a tech giant to a deity of the digital age. He saw his wife as another asset, the most beautiful in his portfolio. She was elegant, intelligent in a quiet, non-threatening way, and the perfect accessory for a man of his stature. Her pregnancy, while unplanned, was a future acquisition, a male heir to inherit the Croft dynasty. As he turned from the bar, the light caught him, and Elara smelled it. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath his own powerful scent, but it was there. A sharp, synthetic floral note, utterly alien to their world of subtle, natural perfumes. It was the scent of ambition, of cheap glamour trying to pass as couture. It was the scent of Kalen Vance, his ferociously ambitious protégé. It was not the first time. The late nights, the clipped explanations, the phone that was always angled away from her, they were the tremors before an earthquake. He was dismissive, his mind already on stage, basking in the adulation of the world. "I need you to look your best tomorrow, Elara. The press will be everywhere. Wear the blue." It was a command, not a request. He saw her as part of the stage dressing for his triumph. Later, the sound of the shower was a roar of white noise, a temporary shield against the crushing silence of their marriage. Julian's laptop lay open on the polished obsidian of his desk, a glowing rectangle in the dim room. An email notification bloomed on the screen, a small banner of text that would detonate her world. It was from his COO, Marcus Thorne. The subject line was innocuous: final launch logistics. A cold, creeping dread guided Elara's hand. She told herself she was being foolish, paranoid. But the scent of that other perfume was still in the air, a poisonous pollen. Her fingers trembled as she touched the trackpad. The email thread was short. Marcus confirming the security detail for the event. Julian's reply. Then, another message from Julian, clearly intended for a different conversation, mistakenly appended to the chain. "Thorne, ensure Kalen's front row seat is prime for the camera angle when I bring her up. This is as much her launch as mine. Time to clear out the domestic deadweight and install a real partner. The board will understand once they see the new VP of Innovation in action. As for the rest, the lawyers will handle it post-announcement. It's cleaner this way. A public severing. Domestic deadweight." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She scrolled up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found the original thread he had meant to reply to. It was a long chain between him and Marcus, mapping out his life after the launch. It was all there. The plan to announce Kalen's promotion on stage. The plan to serve Elara with divorce papers the next day. They referred to her pregnancy not as a joy, but as an unfortunate complication and a financial liability to be managed. He had already calculated her worth, her exit package, as if she were a redundant executive. Her hand went to her stomach, a protective, primal gesture. A cold wave washed over her, so profound it felt like dying. Then she saw it. The final, glittering shard of cruelty. Attached to the email was a hotel confirmation for the coming weekend. A penthouse suite at the Biltmore, booked for him and Kaylin. A celebratory trip. The reservation was under the name, the Croft family. The initial shock was a physical thing, a vacuum that stole the breath from her lungs and the strength from her limbs. She sank into Julian's cold leather office chair, her hand still pressed against the gentle curve of her belly, where their daughter was sleeping, innocent of the wreckage of their world. She stared at the city lights, a billion indifferent stars, and saw her future laid out in the cruelest detail. The pitted wife. The tabloid tragedy. A woman discarded on the eve of her husband's greatest triumph. A cliché. She visualized it. The tearful press statements, the humiliating retreat to her parents' home, the lonely birth of a child whose father saw her as a liability. She saw herself shrinking, becoming the ghost he already believed her to be. And in that moment of absolute despair, something else stirred. It was a deep, ancient thing, a bedrock of resilience she had forgotten she possessed. It was the iron in her grandmother's blood, a woman who had survived famines and fled wars, her dignity her only luggage. Victimhood was a choice, a role she would not accept. The grief did not vanish. It was transmuted. The sorrowful, icy water of betrayal was heated by a sudden, volcanic core of anger. It wasn't a hot, messy rage. It was a cold, clarifying fury that burned away the fog of her love for him. Domestic deadweight. Unfortunate complication. He had not just betrayed her, he had erased her. He had assessed her, quantified her, and marked her for deletion. Her years of support, her quiet partnership, her love, all written off as zero in his brutal calculus of power. Her mind, which Julian had always praised for its quaint and charming interest in botany, began to work with a terrifying new clarity. He saw her as a decorative plant in his sterile apartment. He had forgotten her specialization. He had forgotten her doctoral thesis on the biochemical signaling pathways in extremophile flora, plants that thrive in the harshest, most impossible environments. He had forgotten that she was a scientist, a master of systems, of causes and effects. He was about to get a lesson in ecology. A plan began to form, not from a place of revenge, but from a place of cosmic rebalancing. He wanted a public spectacle for his coronation. He would get one, but it would be his scaffold, not his throne. She thought of a story he'd once told her, a cautionary tale he wielded with smug superiority. His father, a brilliant physicist, had been publicly humiliated at a symposium. A rival had proven his grand theory rested on a single, flawed data point, a fatal error. To make his point, the rival had brought a rare orchid on stage, the Phalaenopsis gigantea, and used its unique, singular stem to represent the single point of failure that brought the entire structure of his father's work crashing down. Julian lived in terror of that kind of humiliation. Alara stood up and walked to her private conservatory, the one part of the penthouse that felt alive. She ran her fingers over the leaves of a rare fern. He wanted to show. He wanted to talk about legacy. Fine. She would give him a legacy he would never forget. She picked up her phone and called her best friend, Anya Sharma. Anya, she said, her voice devoid of its usual softness, now forged into something hard and sharp. I need a lawyer. No, not for a divorce. For a demolition. The Ethelred unveiling was the hottest ticket in the tech world. The auditorium was a temple of modernism, bathed in the cool blue light of the Ethelred logo. The air buzzed with anticipation and the collective worth of the titans of finance, media, and technology who filled its seats. On stage, Julian Croft was in his element. He was more than a CEO. He was a prophet, a visionary painting a picture of the future with his new creation, Kronos. He was captivating, his charisma a gravitational force that pulled every eye in the room toward him. In the front row, Kaylin Vance was radiant, her face a mask of triumphant adoration. She was the chosen one, the beautiful, brilliant successor, and she drank in the moment, her gaze fixed on the man who was about to give her the world. Julian was nearing the crescendo of his presentation, his voice booming with the certainty of a man who knew he had already won. Kronos is not just a product, he declared. It is a new dawn for human potential, a legacy for generations to come. It was at that precise moment that the grand doors at the back of the auditorium swung silently open. A collective ripple of motion, a turning of heads, propagated through the crowd like a wave. Julian paused, annoyed by the distraction, and then he saw her. It was Alara, but it was not the Alara he knew. The demure, pastel-clad wife was gone. In her place stood a queen. She wore a gown of magnificent, shimmering silk, a deep, vibrant magenta that seemed to drink the light from the room. It was the exact color of the Phalaenopsis gigantea, the orchid from his father's nightmare. She walked down the central aisle, not with the hesitant steps of an intruder, but with the slow, deliberate grace of a monarch walking to her throne. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability, but a proclamation of power, a symbol of true legacy. The energy in the room did not just shift, it reversed its polarity. Every eye was on her. Julian Croft, the master of the universe, was suddenly a secondary character in his own play. He felt a prickle of cold sweat on his neck. The color of the dress was a deliberate, impossible coincidence. Alara, he said into his microphone, his voice tight, attempting to project an authority he no longer felt. This is hardly the time or the place. She reached the foot of the stage without breaking her stride. A stunned production assistant, holding a spare microphone, seemed to offer it to her, as if in tribute. She took it. As she ascended the few steps to the stage, the crowd held a collective breath. She was his judge, jury, and executioner, arriving at the moment of his sentencing. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was amplified by the auditorium's perfect acoustics and a lifetime of suppressed authority. It was calm, clear, and colder than glacial ice. On the contrary, Julian, she said, her gaze sweeping over the shocked faces in the front row before landing on him. This is the perfect time. You stand here speaking of legacy. She glanced at Kalen, whose smile had frozen into a rictus of confusion. And you speak of a new vice president of innovation. Let's talk about the real innovation and the real legacy of Ethelred Corporation. Julian's face was a mask of disbelief, his mind scrambling to catch up. What are you talking about? Security, he hissed into his mic, but no one moved. They were all transfixed. Alara turned her back on him, facing the colossal screen that displayed the sleek Kronos logo. Anya, she said into the microphone, a quiet command. Now, in the tech booth at the rear of the hall, Anya Sharma hit a key. The Kronos logo dissolved. In its place appeared a dense, terrifyingly complex schematic of a biochemical algorithm. The audience murmured, confused. This, Alara announced, her voice resonating with absolute command, is the beating heart of Kronos. Julian sold you a story about a revolutionary processing chip. A lie. The screen flickered, showing molecular diagrams. Kronos is not a technology product. It is a biocomputing marvel. Its core logic is based on the enzymatic processes of extremophile flora that allow them to process information and adapt to hostile environments. Another image flashed onto the screen, the cover page of a doctoral thesis from 5 years prior. Her name was at the top. The title was Biochemical Signaling and Data Processing in Extremophilic Organisms. She pointed to the algorithm on the screen. This is my work. My research. Work that you, Julian, dismissed as my quaint little hobby, work that you stole from my personal server while I slept in our bed. A wave of gasps and frantic whispers swept through the auditorium. Julian's face was utterly ashen. The significance of the orchid-colored dress slammed into him like a physical blow. This was his father's humiliation, resurrected and tailored perfectly for him. But she wasn't finished. He didn't act alone, she continued, her voice devoid of all emotion. The screen changed again. There, for the entire world to see, was the email chain between Julian and Marcus Thorne. The damning phrases were highlighted in red: domestic deadweight, unfortunate complication, a public severing. And then, the ultimate betrayal was revealed. A second thread appeared, one where Julian and Marcus discussed Kalen. They spoke of how they had used her to secure a key patent, a patent derived from Alara's own research, and planned to cut her out of the company after the launch, leaving her with a fraction of what she was promised. Kalen Vance, the mistress, the protégé, saw her own face reflected in the screen of her phone as a dozen journalists turned their cameras on her. Her triumphant glow had curdled into a mask of pure horror. She was not the queen in waiting. She was just another asset to be liquidated. The Ethelred legacy, Elara concluded, her gaze now a laser beam fixed on her husband, is a fraud. It is built on theft, lies, and betrayal, and it will be judged accordingly. She placed the microphone gently on the lectern, the soft thud echoing like a gunshot in the stunned silence. She did not look back. She did not run. With the same regal poise with which she had entered, she turned and walked away, descending the stage and proceeding back up the aisle. The entire room, the investors, the journalists, the rivals, the sycophants, watched in absolute silence as she departed, a queen abdicating a corrupt and shattered throne. She left Julian standing alone on stage, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light, a fallen king amidst the smoking ruins of his coronation. The fallout was not a slow burn, it was an inferno. Before Elara had even reached her car, the digital world was ablaze. Gossip blogs and tech news sites exploded with the story. Titan of tech toppled by scorned wife. Ethelred's Kronos, a stolen genius. Julian's carefully constructed image of an infallible visionary shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. He was reframed overnight, from titan to thief, from king to fool. The consequences in the corporate world were swift and brutal. The next morning, Ethelred's stock went into freefall. Investors panicked. The carefully negotiated, company-making merger with a massive Japanese conglomerate, a deal worth billions, evaporated. The Japanese CEO cited a character and intellectual property integrity clause in the contract. In less than 24 hours, the public humiliation had wiped out a decade of value. Julian's kingdom was crumbling. The Viper, seeing his moment, prepared to strike. Marcus Thorne, the loyal COO, played his part to perfection. He called an emergency board meeting, his face a grim mask of feigned shock and betrayal. He used the very emails Elara had displayed to paint Julian as an unstable, reckless egomaniac who had put the entire company at risk for a sordid affair. He has made a mockery of us, of everything we've built, Marcus thundered, conveniently omitting his own complicity. He presented a calm, rational plan to stabilize the ship, a plan that began with the immediate and permanent removal of its captain. Kalen Vance was summarily fired via a curt email from Human Resources, a discarded pawn in a much larger game. The board, desperate to stop the bleeding, voted unanimously. Julian Croft was exiled from his own empire. He retreated to the penthouse. The silence he had once curated as a sign of his power was now a suffocating, accusatory presence. The vast glass walls that once offered a view of his domain now felt like the transparent walls of a prison cell, allowing the world to peer in at his disgrace. Stripped of his company, his wife, his mistress, and his reputation, he was left with nothing but the hollow echo of his own hubris. He wandered through the sterile rooms, a king in exile, haunted by the ghost of the man he thought he was. He found an old photograph of his father, tucked away in a drawer. For his entire life, he had been running from his father's shadow, desperate to surpass him. Now, looking at the stern, disappointed face in the picture, he saw only his own failure, his own public disgrace, reflected back at him 100-fold. Elara did not seek refuge in the luxury she was entitled to. There were no five-star hotels, no opulent hideaways. She went first to Anya's apartment, a small, warm, book-filled space that felt more like a home than the penthouse ever had. After a few days, when the initial media storm had subsided into a constant, roaring fire, she left the city entirely. She drove to the coast, to the small, weathered cottage her grandmother had left her. It was a place of authenticity, of life. The air smelled of salt and wild roses, not recycled air and expensive cologne. The shelves were crammed with old botanical texts, the walls covered in pressed flowers, and the garden outside was a chaotic, beautiful tangle of life. Her secret weapon, her formidable intellect, had already been deployed, the first stage of her plan executed to perfection. Now, in the quiet sanctuary of the cottage, she began to build. She didn't fight for a piece of Julian's shattered empire. She started her own. She registered a new company under her maiden name, Virescent Labs. It was the antithesis of Ethelred. It was small, transparent, and founded on the principle of ethical science. She began by publishing the research papers that Julian had encouraged her to keep private, fearing they would overshadow his own perceived genius. The scientific community, which had known of her promise before she had vanished into the role of a billionaire's wife, took immediate notice. Her work was groundbreaking. Ethical tech funds, venture capitalists looking for the next true revolution, began to reach out. She wasn't building another cold monolith of steel and glass. She was cultivating a garden, something organic, resilient, and fundamentally hers. She was not just surviving, she was thriving. Months passed. Alara's belly grew, and so did the reputation of Virescent Labs. Julian remained in his self-imposed exile, a ghost rattling around his empty fortune. The news from Ethelred, filtered through the business press, was grim. Under Marcus Thorne's leadership, the truth was far worse than the rumors. Marcus Thorne was not restructuring Ethelred. He was performing a vivisection, selling its vital organs for parts before declaring bankruptcy and walking away with a secret, 9-figure payout. He was salting the earth, destroying everything, including the foundational technology built on Alara's stolen work. She was faced with an impossible choice. She could do nothing. She could let it all burn, a final, fitting pyre for Julian's hubris and Thorne's treachery. It would be justice, but it would also mean the destruction of her own legacy, the work that formed the very soul of the company. And it would mean her child's birthright, the tangible result of her genius, would be erased forever. She made a call. They met at a small, wind-battered cafe on the coastal highway, miles from the world of power lunches and penthouse views. Julian looked like a stranger. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out weariness. He was thinner, his expensive suit replaced by simple, worn clothes. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time, she saw fear and shame in his eyes, not entitlement. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out the data on the small table between them. "He's not just running the company into the ground," she said, her voice even. "He's selling it for scrap." Julian stared at the evidence, his face pale. "He betrayed me," he whispered, the words thick with disbelief. "He betrayed the company," Alara corrected, her tone sharp. "The company built on my intellectual property. I will not stand by and watch a parasite gut my work because of the mess you created." She looked at him, her gaze unflinching. "I have a plan to stop him, but I can't do it alone. I need your shares and your name. Are you in?" Their war room was not a sleek boardroom, but the cluttered, sun-drenched living room of her grandmother's cottage. Surrounded by botanical prints and the scent of drying herbs, they pieced together their counterattack. It was a fragile, unspoken alliance, built not on forgiveness but on a shared objective. Julian, the fallen king, found himself taking orders from the queen he had tried to discard. He made calls to his few remaining loyal contacts, while Alara, the strategic genius, mapped out Thorne's entire conspiracy, finding the legal. Calmly, methodically, she presented the irrefutable proof of Marcus Thorne's corporate treason. The secret bank. The board would have a new chair with ultimate authority over all research, development, and strategic direction. The power dynamic was now codified, legally binding, and permanent. Julian was the face on the throne. Alara was the power behind it. A few weeks later, in the quiet, sterile room of a private hospital wing, Alara gave birth to a daughter. She named her Lily. Julian was there. He didn't hover or command. He stayed in a chair in the corner, a silent, humbled presence. When the nurse asked if he wanted to hold his daughter, he looked at Alara first, a silent question. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He held the tiny, sleeping child with a reverence that bordered on terror. His eyes full of a moisture, he quickly blinked away. He was not looking at an heir to an empire. He was looking at a miracle he knew he did not deserve. In that moment, the old world, with its kings and crowns, died completely. A year passed. The new equilibrium settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. They were not a couple. Alara had expanded the coastal cottage, adding a state-of-the-art lab that overlooked the wild garden. She was the chairwoman of Ethelred and the CEO of Virescent Labs, two roles she managed with breathtaking efficiency. Julian lived in a modest apartment in the city, running the day-to-day operations of the company he had once called his own. He was a good CEO, attentive and diligent, because he ran every major decision by her. The fear of her veto was a more effective motivator than the lust for power had ever been. His visits to the coast were for Lily. He would arrive on Saturday mornings, his car full of groceries, his hands ready to fix a sticking door or a leaky faucet. He would spend hours on the floor, building block towers that Lily would gleefully knock down. He and Alara spoke, but their conversations were about their daughter or about the company. The heavy, accusatory silence of their past had been replaced by a comfortable, peaceful quiet. It was the silence of a truce, of acceptance. One evening, as he was packing up to leave, he paused at the door, his back to her. "Thank you, Alara," he said, his voice low. "Not for the company. Not for saving me from Thorn." He turned, and his eyes, stripped of their old arrogance, were startlingly clear. "Thank you for showing me what was real. For showing me what I had thrown away." He took a small breath. "I know I can never earn back what I lost. Your love, your trust, that's gone. I did that." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "But I hope, one day, I can earn your friendship." Alara looked at him for a long moment, at this humbled, broken, and slowly rebuilding man. She gave a small, slow nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was a beginning. In the end, their story became a quiet legend in the circles they once dominated. It was a lesson written not in headlines, but in the profound shift of their lives. It proved that true power is not found in the dominion over others, in the acquisition of wealth, or in the construction of glass towers. It is forged in the quiet, internal mastery of oneself. Redemption, Julian learned, is not about getting back what you have lost, but about the painful, daily work of building something new and honest from the ruins of your own making. He lost an empire of glittering illusion to find a small, fragile piece of his own humanity. And Alara, by refusing to be the victim in her own story, reclaimed more than just her life's work. She proved that the most formidable structures, the most arrogant kings, can be brought down not by a battering ram, but by a single, perfectly placed seed of truth, cultivated in silence and allowed, finally, to grow.